Okay, it is preparing to live stream. We are not there yet, but it's almost there. Okay. All right, we are now live streaming. Bear with me 1 moment while I hit record, and then we're ready.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council's August 21st, 2024 Executive Committee meeting. This Executive Committee meeting is being conducted remotely via Zoom video conference consistent with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. This includes an extension until March 31st, 2025. Meeting provisions of former Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, which suspends the requirements of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location to provide public access to the meeting while limiting the potential for abuse of video conferencing technology. Members of the public may view the proceeding at www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. And with that, I will call the meeting to order. First up is roll call. So if everyone could unmute, I would appreciate it. All right, here we go. Imai.
Present.
All right. Colette.
Present.
Kurt.
Present.
Keith.
Present.
Karen.
Present.
Jen.
Present.
Tom Daniel. John DePriest. John Featherson. I see him here. It looks like he's still connecting to audio, so we'll count that. Tom? Mo?
Present. Feels like the Democratic convention here.
We just need a really killer soundtrack, right? Sagoon?
Yeah, let's discuss the music for that. I want to discuss that.
Tabor?
Here.
Robert King? Angie? Gina? Steve Olenoff?
Here.
Vandana? Claire? Sam? You're muted, but I'm counting you. Steve. Steve Silvera?
Here.
Juan? Elaine?
Here.
And Erin here. Thank you so much, everyone. First up on the agenda is the approval of minutes from July 17th, 2024. I am going to ask for a motion to put it on the consent agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion made by Imai and a second made by Karen. Oh, Steve Olenoff, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I have some real problems with the minutes there. We went into an executive session, and the open meeting law has very strict rules about what you have to do to go into executive session, roll call, and stating reasons for doing so. None of that is reflected in the minutes. So I think we really need to fix that.
Steve, I actually noticed the same. Lizzie, who prepared the minutes, is on vacation. If you want to delay until the next meeting to adopt the minutes, I think I can probably add some elements with her to the minutes to reflect those issues.
Yeah, I would. I think we should just drop the minutes and do it next time.
Okay.
All right, Imai and Karen, as the maker and second of the motion, are you guys good with that?
Yep,
Yes.
withdraw my motion.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Steve. And Mark, just make a note to have that prepared for
Yes.
our next agenda then. Great. All right, next up, review and approval of the FY25 work plan. I see Ben, and I just heard that Lizzie's on vacation, so
Yes.
take it away, Ben.
I'll actually pass it off to Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Mark, Ben.
That's okay. So the full work plan has been distributed to you. It's essentially the same as the one we distributed last time. There were only very minor changes and adjustments. I'm glad we had a pretty full discussion about it last time and presentations. I'm glad to entertain any questions. I know it's a very long document, so please understand I'm available to answer any questions anytime. If, next week you decide you want to discuss the public health section, I'm glad to do that. Just give me a call. But we would like to adopt it. The staff is already working to implement it. These work plans usually run consistent with the fiscal year, and this one does as well. So I will entertain any questions if there are any, and if not, we can have a motion to adopt.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Does anyone have any questions?
I would like to move that we adopt the plan absent any questions.
Okay, great.
I'll
Would you?
second that.
Okay, okay. I have a motion made by Mo and a second made by Kurt. Would you like to put that on a consent agenda, Mo, or would you like a separate?
Yes, the consent agenda.
Okay, great. And Kurt, you're okay with that as the seconder of the
Yes,
motion?
yep.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So that has gone on the consent agenda and we will vote on that at the end of the meeting. Great. All right, next up on the agenda is the executive report. Take it away, Mark.
And Aaron, if I could, before we move ahead, I sense that we are moving at a unusually rapid clip today. And I don't have as much support on the screen as I usually do. So I'm going to ask either Ben or Patrice to make sure I'm looking on the screen. I think Leah is already here. So we're set for the legislative update. And Keith, of course, is here. But if Leah, if you need any members of your staff, I would ask you to reach out to them sooner rather than later. And if I could ask maybe Ben to reach out to Annis and let her know that we are likely to take up the staff presentation, I don't know, maybe around noon, which is earlier than was expected. Okay. All right. So executive report. We are now doing these. I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about new format, just so people are aware of it. We used to always do a lengthy executive director's report once a month at Keith's recommendation when he was president. We began to skip months and do what ended up being a longer executive director's report, but about once every 2 months, usually. They became so long that they were not really accessible to anyone who couldn't put aside half a day to read them. So we've gone to a new system in the last year where we do a report every month. Departments are asked to prioritize only between 2 and 4 items, usually depending on the size of the department. And because we're back to monthly, every department does not have to feel compelled to do a report every month. So for example, data services is not in this month's report, but they were last month and they will be next month. And this has kept the reports down to about 9 to 10 pages, which is a lot better than the 30, sometimes 36 pages that we used to have. So I just want people to be aware of the slightly new format and timing and hope that it works a little better for people. I'll now take a look at this month's report and emphasize a few key issues. And then I will, at the end, have a couple of items that aren't in the report, but that I just want to mention. So several items in regard to the Clean Energy Department. I will take a note on page 2, and I have to start paginating these. I'm sorry, this one is not paginated. The cool roofs work. We are doing a tremendous amount of work throughout the region in many different forms, as you'll see in this item, to encourage people to build or retrofit roofs for purposes of cooling, to reduce ambient air temperatures and also to reduce the consumption of energy for both heating and especially air conditioning in the summer. I think most people are aware that our highest energy consumption days are actually not in the winter, they're in the summer due to air conditioning. So I ask all of you to, take a look at that. Congratulations to the clean energy team for their work in this regard. And any of those products are good products to read over time when you have a chance. I'm not going to talk about the end of the legislative session, even though part of it is covered in this report, because Leah and Keith are going to be doing that, and I may have a few comments on that at that time. You'll see under land use, the completion of the first phase of the Milford Comprehensive Plan. I note this, we do a lot of comp plans or master plans with communities, but this one is significant for several reasons. First of all, a more, I would say, aggressive and intriguing set of community outreach activities for what is really the only community in the SWAP subregion with a significantly diverse population and a lot of people who do not usually participate in the planning process, but who we worked very hard to bring into the planning process here. Secondly, in my tenure with MAPC, we've done very little work with Milford, which again is the largest community in the SWAP subregion. It's not a huge community, but in that subregion, it's a big community. And we view it as a regional regional center. We've really tried to see if we can do more work with Milford and to establish a better, more productive, more engaged relationship with that community. And it paid off in their asking us to do the comp plan. It's not been without its struggles and challenges, but I'm very pleased that they've come to the end of the first part. And I think that the land use team, the community engagement team, and all the other people, data and others who have been actively engaged, comms, it's really, it's been a very good effort. And I wanted to congratulate them for that. I also want to draw attention to the Arlington Library Plus Housing Study. I think some of you know about this. We are working on the idea of locating affordable or mixed income housing on top of libraries. Arlington is not the only place that's happening in the region, but it's the one that we're working on. And I am hoping that it is an idea that more people will use in the future and where we will be able to help communities to meet both their library needs and their housing needs, maybe in one place. There was I will draw your attention to the particular effort to involve young people in this planning process and to ask them what it would be like to live over the library. Many of you know that I place a special premium on trying to involve young people in planning processes, because if I don't know now how I'm going to be able to keep up with hiring. So that's my hidden strategy. But this is a case where we've actually done it and got some positive feedback for this project. The Shannon Grant Summerfest, which used to be known as the Shannon Grant Basketball Tournament, was held in Winthrop a few Saturdays ago. And I wanted to give particular credit to the entire municipal collaboration team and government affairs for their work putting this effort together. It has changed significantly in recent years. When it was just a basketball tournament, it was still loads of fun and we had lots of people, but almost all the participants were male and they tended to be older teams. The entire nature of the event has changed so that it's much more multifaceted and also much more egalitarian. There are many, many younger kids that are now coming to participate, which is really an age group we're focusing on in the Shannon program to get people involved early. And it is now, I would say, an equal group of boys and girls. So that is a big success. And the folks in those two departments deserve a lot of credit for really reformulating this event, but keeping it a very fun and successful endeavor. Barry Keppard and his team have access to an amazing new data set on health equity issues. That's mentioned at the very bottom of the page, just where public health is beginning, and then over to the next page. Barry would be glad to discuss with any of you how to access that data and how to look at it. maybe to help with your own public health work or just a better understanding of your community or your subregion. I know the folks in public health are very excited about this. I don't think Eric Hove is doing an update on strategic plan today, or Ben, but we give you a complete update, a pretty lengthy one, under the strategic initiative section of the report. This is moving along. We're hoping that we're going to be done with it October, November, but we will be adopting it. We will be asking the executive committee first, and then the council to be adopting it at the winter council meeting. We might have been able to do it at a normally scheduled fall council meeting. But as some of you know, we had to move the fall council meeting to, I think it's October 10th. It's earlier than it would normally be for a variety of conflict reasons, other events, holidays, and also the election. So we decided it'd be a little more prudent to go earlier rather than to, go later and begin to bang into Thanksgiving. So we won't be done with the strategic plan in time to adopt it, but we'll have plenty of time to discuss it, and we'll bring it to the council for adoption in February or March. And lastly, I'd like to point out about the 3 transportation white papers that have been released. They are on 3 very specific ways of raising additional money for the transportation system. The transportation team and others in the agency, government affairs, Lizzie, I believe data services, worked very hard on these 3 papers. The idea is to try in this transportation finance discussion not to discuss only the same things we've been discussing for the last 20 years, but see if we can actually come up with some new ideas and put some data and recommendations behind them. And that's what these three papers are about. We have been invited to present and to answer questions by the Governor's Transportation Finance Task Force, and Lizzie will be leading that effort. Eric would often be involved, but he's on vacation at that time. They've invited us, so Lizzie will be handling it. That concludes my report. The only other thing that I wanted to say, and I don't really want to get into a discussion about this now, but I do want people to know, because I've gotten a few questions, the question of whether or not the staff will unionize, the professional clerical staff will unionize at MAPC, is still before the Department of Labor Relations, and also before the Commonwealth Employee Relations Board, CERB. We have heard nothing. The arguments were filed weeks ago, close to a month. And as soon as we hear anything, when and if we hear something, well, we will hear something, I will make sure to let the executive committee know the outcome of the Commonwealth's deliberations.
Great, thank you, Mark.
Erin, actually, I just wanted to mention one other thing, if I could. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Several important positions. You see in the report that 5 new staff people are on board in the last month or so. They tend to be in, somewhat more junior positions, but really great people. There are some big positions that are being filled at the moment. Assistant Director of Municipal Collaboration, I believe, is posted. The research manager has been posted for a while, and we have good applicants. We have a strong pool. And we have also decided that we will be posting the Director of Land Use position internally after a fairly long discussion about what the right way was to handle the departure of Mark Rassicott from the agency next month. And the decision has been made to post that position internally rather than post it externally or to do any reorganization. Both of those things were considered for a variety of honestly fairly complex reasons. This is the decision that we've come to. So you can look on the site for the first 2 of those. The third one will be internal only. And if anyone wants to discuss any of those positions with me or Lizzie, just give us a buzz.
Great,
Or
thank you, Mark.
Angela's here as well.
I see Keith's hand raised. Keith?
Thanks very much. And Mark, thanks for a great and thorough report. I wanted to ask about an item that I did not see on the report, and that's on MBTA communities zoning, whether there's any update in general on how communities are proceeding. I follow a compliance map that Amy Dane posts, which seems to indicate that only 3 communities are actually have made it all the way across the finish line. And I know a lot of our communities have had their legislative body votes. They've submitted their compliance applications to HLC. I know some of them have waited. Just in Concord, for example, we waited 4 months to get 4 or 5 months to get a pre-adoption review for our town meeting that took place 3 months ago. So getting it that late was hardly helpful. So I'm just wondering how anything that MAPC may be aware of how our member communities and the region are doing and making progress towards our goals under MBTA communities zoning, and my fear is that HLC is going to need a lot more resources still to get us across the finish line. Thanks.
So, Aaron, do we want to see if Imai has a question on the same topic before I answer? No,
He does
different.
not.
Okay. Waiting appears to be the key word here. Everybody is waiting. Virtually no one has been certified. They finally decided to come through with the approval of a number of so-called EFAs, economic feasibility analyses, which is the part of the process that is used to determine whether or not HLC approves of the inclusionary zoning element in a 3A zone. I have discussed this with HLC staff on several occasions, and Andrea Harris-Long, who is, of course, our housing manager and is not, I don't think, on the screen today, has discussed it with staff much more frequently than I have. If there's a problem, I don't know what it is, and I've tried to suss that out. What we keep being told is they're under review. There are a lot of them. It's complicated. The agency is under-resourced, and we'll be getting to it really soon. I have emphasized that this needs to be looked at. The urgency is particularly important from a town perspective, because you do not call a town meeting on a week's notice. It only happens usually twice a year. And if anything needs to be fixed, that's where it has to be fixed. My entreaties have been met with empathy, but not response, not action. We have offered to undertake part of this review for HLC. We have offered to do soup to nuts. We have offered to do individual pieces. We have offered to just second someone to the HLC staff to help them out. And our suggestions have been politely, courteously declined, but declined. So I've decided to do the only thing I know how to do, which is I'm having breakfast with the secretary on Friday. Maybe I'll know more over eggs and bacon. So, but I have several things to discuss with Ed, but this is number one on the list.
Thanks for that, Mark. It's really appreciated. And for those
I wish I had
communities
more
that-
actual information, Keith.
Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head, that it's for those communities that have precious little time to call a fall special town meeting if they weren't planning on doing so ahead of a December 31st deadline. And at a minimum, for those communities who may feel that the advice or the signals that the HLC staff is sending to them allows them to fix things at a that if they can submit their application for compliance first, meet that deadline on December 31st, with the knowledge that if a fix identified by HLC requires a town meeting a vote, that the community won't suddenly find itself out of compliance in the months heading up to Springtown meeting.
I do have to say, Keith, that, I have asked, like, I kind of said, like, don't name names, but like, are there problems? Is this taking so long because like no one is really coming into compliance? And I have been told, no, it's not that the applications are bad. It's just they're complicated. We've never done this before. We have limited staff, and we want to do a very careful job because this will be seen as the precedent for everything else that follows it. And I understand that. I think that's reasonable. I think that's responsible. The staff there in this division is highly skilled, but the deadlines, even the sort of unofficial deadlines that I've occasionally gotten, they pass without anything. I have thought of simply suggesting I give the whole thing to Elaine and she would take care of it in about a week. But I haven't suggested that yet. I'm keeping that one in my back pocket.
I couldn't possibly even help them at all with what I'm already doing, Mark.
Great, thank you. Imai?
Okay, thank you. Mark, I was wondering for the Shannon grant, like the change in participation levels, which is great. What did you folks, or what can you tell us about like change in outreach that you did to achieve that shift? Particularly like you said, it's more gender balanced and more young people coming in now, so that when we're doing outreach, we can maybe use some of the same strategies. Is it maybe just because it's basketball and Caitlin Clark now exists, or is it something else?
Well, it is, and honestly, Amy and her staff could answer this better than I can, Imai. But what I do know is that, shifting from basketball to a wide array of sports, not all of which are, competitive game sports, was helpful. And also, it's just that the participants, which are mainly the law enforcement partners and what we call the prevention partners, all of them have shifted to, really trying to get young people, not just to the event, but involved in the program earlier in their young lives, because they believe that is a better strategy for positive long-term outcomes. And so they're doing the outreach on the ground. It's not only related to this Summerfest, it's related to participation in the entire program year long. I believe Colette has a question.
I do. That's okay.
Go
Mark,
ahead, Colette, sorry.
it's okay. I was really sorry to miss the MAPC event recently that you had on the fiscal crisis at the T. I'd love if you can give me a little bit of feedback. What are you hearing? Was that well attended? Were people excited? And what do you think is a sort of reception of these alternative fee streams that you're coming up with? I love that you're thinking about, something new rather than the other thoughts you've had in the past. I will just say last night we had our select board meeting. We opened the warrant. It's closing on Friday. We're trying to get to the end of MBTA compliance too. And I will say that we got our feedback from EOHLC and the Attorney General's office. They are doing a very, very detailed job. They went through our bylaws with a fine-tooth comb and came back with some cleanup that they had to do. They had really, really done a good job in their review. So we are, marching forward with our final sort of tidy up to get in compliance there. But you know, if we don't have transportation, what's the point of having multifamily housing on top of train stations? So we actually had Brian Kane from the executive director of the MBTA advisory board come to our meeting last night to give us an overview so we can all get good and terrified about the fiscal situation at the T, so we can write, you know, have a well-educated letter to our legislative delegation saying, please, 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 please put together a reasonable budget for the T, because we are doing our piece in building housing by transportation. You need to do your piece to have a future for a fiscal future for that as well. But I'm just curious, how well attended was that event for MEPC? What are you hearing? Are they positive vibes, or not showing their hand yet? Just curious.
So Colette, we could take an hour to just discuss this. I'm going to be very brief and say a few things. I think it'd actually be a good idea maybe in September or October if we focus the executive committee on transportation finance issues. The webinar was our best attended webinar ever. For some reason, the number is popping out of my head. I can't remember the exact number, but it was hundreds of people participated. Brian did a great job with the presentation that he often makes, which is both very detailed, but also quite accessible on the history and current situation of the finances of the T. Tom McGee and Mary Skelton Roberts also spoke as board members and had interesting and useful things to say. I don't know where the Transportation Finance Commission is going, and I don't know what kind of an impact it's going to have. We all know the governor has taken a few items off the table. Some members of the administration have said words like, well, we're going to come up with a list of recommendations, or not recommendations, we're going to come up with a master list of possible ways to raise money. And then it's up to the legislature. And my answer to that usually is, well, there's an in-between phase there. It's actually up to the governor to propose to the legislature what she wants to see. I have been straightforward in saying that, you know, we can have another commission report. It'll be the, I think, 6th commission report of my tenure at MAPC. I don't know if Steve is on the line, Steve Silvera, but obviously he's, I don't know, what shall I call you, Steve? The granddaddy of these commissions? I'm not sure. And they've all said slightly different, but largely similar things. And we haven't, you know, we have not fundamentally reformed the way in which we raise money for the MBTA since 1998. It's been 26 years. And if the line I have been using is, if the commission does not support new taxes, tolls, or fees, or if the governor is unwilling to support new taxes, tolls, or fees, then they can pretend that this problem is going to be solved, and that will not be true. And, you know, that is, I feel personally, I feel we have this upcoming legislative session to significantly change the equation here, or else my recommendation will be that the T begin a downsizing process. And maybe until people see that, they're just not going to be willing to raise the money that other states raise routinely.
Thank you.
I don't mean to
Right.
be such a downer, but I think that's
I know.
the realistic situation.
Yeah. That was how we felt last night after this presentation.
And it's not just the T,
Sure.
it's all the RTAs, and it's the roadways and bridges too. Not in exactly the same way and not to quite the same extent, but you know, I just went, we go over MassWorks, we do all the MassWorks applications. We review and provide input and commentary to EOED. And one of the things I noticed this year is that people are coming in just in droves for roadway projects. More so than in the past, I think. I haven't done a technical analysis, but just, I look at the applications, 31 applications, a lot of them are for roads, which would normally, you'd either do Chapter 90 or you'd go to the MPO. And people are so desperate for finding a source of money that they're coming to MassWorks for roadway projects. Now, that's entirely okay. It's just when you see so many coming to MassWorks for roadway projects at amounts of money that are not consistent with the usual MassWorks grants, then the pot somewhere else is not full. So, and that's what's causing people to shift. All right.
Any other questions before we before we move on? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mark. All right, next up is the report of the Legislative Committee. I'm going to call on Legislative Committee Chair Keith.
Thanks very much, President Aaron. Keith Bergman, reporting from Concord, Mass. I'm back within the MAPC region and for the rest of the summer. And in fact, I appreciate the opportunity to have met with a couple of our government affairs team, Matt Walsh and Georgia, recently. Sort of did a debrief of things that have that did not happen in the legislative session. Our committee itself took a breather for August after the legislature did so first, and will be. I have to say it's great disappointment that so many things like climate and economic development and other unresolved issues were left on the table. I'm hopeful that this talk of a special legislative session becomes more than talk, because there's still a lot that needs to be done. So, but I did want to thank very much the work of the government affairs team, Leah Robbins, Georgia Barlow, Matt Walsh, is Norman on the call too, and appreciate all the work that the team continues to do, and I'll turn it over to Leah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith. I do have a brief PowerPoint presentation just to sort of walk you through what did and didn't happen in those last weeks of session, to the extent that it's helpful to have a visual rather than me just talking at you. So bear with me as I try to share my screen. Ooh, you'd think one day I would get the hang of this. Okay. Can you guys see the PowerPoint okay?
Yes.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. So I just want to take a step back. This is sort of the end of formal sessions for the legislature, but as Keith alluded to, we're still hoping that they will hold by the statements from the Senate President and the Speaker of the House and the Governor that everyone is committed to coming back in to continue work on a number of these outstanding issues. The government affairs team is already starting to think about what do we do in January for the start of the 194th General Court, even as we're continuing to push on items during this lame duck session potentially. And we're excited to hear your ideas too. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out. So there was not the expected huge flurry of new bills signed into law, but there were some things that were signed. So I do want to just take a quick minute to talk about the Affordable Homes Act that was signed. One of the things I think we are most interested to see what happens next on and to work with the administration on is the accessory dwelling units by right that was signed into law, to try to see what are those regulations that the administration is going to establish, how can we work with them as MAPC on shaping those, similar to how we engaged around 3A. Also in the law now is an Office of Fair Housing, eviction ceiling, some changes to how state surplus land is disposed to prioritize housing, some money, which we will be continuing to advocate for, how that gets spent around public housing modernization and decarbonization and resilience, which will be very exciting. And even amending the condo conversion statute, which will be to allow a municipal option so that you can also regulate those buildings with 4 units or fewer. So we're going to keep watching to see and keep working with the administration on those regulations to set those up. I know Matt and Andrea were at the bill signing. I'm sure a number of you were too. I was bummed I couldn't be there. It seemed like quite the celebration of many, many months of work. Many of these priorities are items that have been on MAPC's legislative agenda for years, even before I came on to MAPC. So it is really sweet to get them across the finish line, even as we think about the many items that didn't yet go across the finish line that we're going to be continuing to work on. So that includes looking at inclusionary zoning at a simple majority, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which would be a local option, and the transfer fee proposal, which Keith mentioned, which we are still kind of mopping my heart up off the floor from that one. So we're going to continue to be having conversations with municipalities and partner organizations about how we keep those in motion. The other bill that passed actually just last week is a bill around maternal health. This is not a bill that MAPC worked on very deeply, but we are incredibly excited about it because it brings to life many of the ideas in Metro Common around solving some of these historic and deeply embedded challenges for women, for birthing people, particularly birthing people who are Black and are experiencing much greater disparities in outcomes. So there's going to be a state licensure pathway for midwives and lactation consultants and a requirement that they receive the same rate as physicians for the same services, which just fills my heart with joy. There's going to be some new grant programs and mandates coverage for postpartum depression. Those are just some of the many highlights, and we'll be sharing more information about that. Parentage Act passed, which dismantles some legal barriers to parenting responsibilities and opens the door for managing children's finances and participating in educational decisions. PFAS and firefighters gear also move forward, and that will mean effective January 1st, 2027. Manufacturers and sellers of personal protective equipment for firefighters will be prohibited from selling gear with intentionally added PFAS. That's part of a much larger PFAS bill that the agency endorsed just this year. So we're really going to keep working on PFAS related issues, but nice to see a small piece of it work forward. A law around firearms move forward, bill preventing circus animals from performing in Massachusetts, which has been on the docket, I think, for like 30 plus years, and a bill around veterans service officers, the HERO bill, and some additional benefits for veterans from the Commonwealth. So those are some of the things that the governor was able to sign in the recent weeks. And we are going to be continuing to work with the administration as they develop regulations to make all of these more real, because we know getting the law done is one thing, getting it implemented in our lives is another. I also just want to call out the fiscal budget for 2025 that was also recently signed into law. I think this was included in the executive summary, but DLTA was level funded at $3 million. We were successful in getting money for the grant assistance program at $2 million, which enables regional planning agencies to apply for state and federal grants on behalf of municipalities. And I want to give a big shout out to Norman for spending many, many hours talking about 2 words and state to update fiscal 24's budget so that those grant funds can also be used for state applications as well. So please, this is a mini commercial to encourage folks to reach out if we can help with grant applications. We've had some great successes there. And then Shannon was also level funded at 12.8. So we are inching back towards the funding level that program had received pre-pandemic. And since we're level funding at 12.8. We are hopeful that we'll be able to continue the expanded size of the Metro Mayor's grant application. So that's the quick update on budget. There is a blog post with many more details about the other line items that impact cities and towns that we advocate for deeply, but these are the 3 items that no one but MAPC and the other RPAs are advocating for, so I call them out in particular. There are a number of bills still in conference committee. As Keith mentioned, there are 9 conference committees still meeting, in addition to other bills that are in Ways and Means and are deeply important to us and other organizations. The citing bill especially is one that is near and dear to our heart, on the government affairs team, especially because Lizzie served on the CEISP, and Lord help me if I can remember the acronym. I will come back to that in the chat. The citing and permitting reforms proposed there had broad support in the House and Senate. And there was some disagreement about the other policy measures that were included in that bill. So the conference committee is still working that out. Particularly, some of the items we're watching are the competitive electric supply reforms, bottle bill, and natural gas utility updates. The economic development bond bill has a lot of opportunities within it for funding programs. This is one that we, because it is bonded funds, will need a roll call vote based on my understanding of the House and Senate rules. But again, rules are always meant to be broken. But that is my understanding, is that has to have a roll call vote, whereas these others could move in other manners. The federal funds legislation would make some matching funds available for federal grant applications using some of the interest on rainy day funds. A number of different pieces related to healthcare that we are looking at as well. So also, I just want to particularly mention other bills that are not in conference committee, but we are still working on, is the Municipal Empowerment Act that the administration filed. Included within it are 3 bills that we are deeply working on that we had worked to file separately this session. Cooperative purchasing legislation, the remote access for public meetings that is enabling us to meet this way today. That ability is expiring in March of next year, early in the legislative session. So we are already having conversations with legislators about how can we keep this issue on the forefront for them. And I deeply encourage all of you to be raising that as well, because it does come at a more challenging time for the legislature to address. And then also having more data about transportation network companies and those food delivery trucks, so that we can better understand their impacts on our roads. I'm going to end there. We are going to do a bigger webinar next week. This is a teaser for the conversation that the government affairs team is going to be having on Tuesday. We can drop a link to that in the chat. I guess the only other thing I will add is that this body approved throughout this session 11 bills that we added to our priorities, a number in arts and culture, clean energy, public health, transportation, environment, and engagement. So really covering the breadth of topics at MAPC. I really want to thank all of you for the many questions and input that have been shaping that agenda. And we've been bringing more MAPC staff to the building to make sure that these presentations are really tied to the work that the agency is doing and that the impact that they're having in communities. So it's been a busy session, continues to be. We are still optimistic for what could happen in the next couple of months, but very clear-eyed that we also need to be focused on January and what we're going to be filing and what we're going to be bringing to all of you as our proposal for any new bills that we want to take on as priorities at the top of the session. So we hope to be pulling that together with our legislative committee support over the next few months. And that's what I got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leah. Does anyone have any questions?
Team, is there anything I forgot that we should double down on? Okay, great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Obviously to the legislative committee, but most obviously government affairs. I know The end of session is really thankless and chaotic and sleepless. And I hope you have been able to at least catch up on that. But thank you so much for all your hard work. So thank you. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. So next up is the staff presentation. I see, okay, is the staff presentation for historic preservation and heritage work by Sarah Scott, who's the Senior Regional Land Use and Historic Preservation Planner, and Lindsay Randall, Senior Regional Humanities Specialist. Sorry, that's a mouthful. I'm first going to call on the Director of the Arts and Culture Department. Hopefully I got your title right, Annis. Okay, good. Annis, to kind of introduce her team.
Thanks, everybody. I just wanted to say quickly that we're really excited to present this practice area to you today. When the Arts and Culture Department launched in 2017, I came into an agency where there was a body of historic preservation work that had been housed largely in the Land Use Department. There was sort of a small but significant body of work there that both consider traditional preservation issues like adaptive reuse, as well as like more interpretive cultural elements of history through projects like the Battle Road Scenic Byway Plan. And since we've launched within the Arts and Culture Department, we've really embraced history and humanities as an important part of how we understand culture and identity in the region, and have enjoyed collaborating with the Land Use Department to bring this historic cultural lens to open space and recreation plans, comprehensive plans, and tourism plans. So excited to have Lindsay Randall here as a regional humanities specialist in the Arts and Culture Department, joining forces with our Sarah Scott from the Land Use Department, who has a specialization in historic preservation practice. And it's been so exciting to see that informal collaboration between our departments be able to grow into a fully fledged new practice area at the agency that's letting us combine our different strengths and perspectives. So excited for the possibilities this work is bringing to MAPC and what we can be doing within the region and supporting our municipalities, and just grateful for this opportunity for Sarah and Lindsay to share it with you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Annis. Can everyone see my screen okay? All right, great. How about now? Can you see it full screen? No? Okay. Let me try.
That's the next slide.
All right, let me try. All right, let's try. Did that work?
No.
All right.
No.
All right, I'm just not going to do it as full screen.
Do you want me to do it?
Maybe. Is that any better? Or is it still getting?
Still showing the next slide.
That's
It's showing two slides. But really, this is fine. I would just leave it. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. I'm a millennial in age, but not in my technical aptitudes. So I'm Sarah Scott. As Annis and Aaron shared, I'm on the land use team. I have a master's in historic preservation and a master's in city planning. So I'm thoroughly excited to be combining those two things in my work here at MAPC along with Lindsay. This is just an overview of some of the folks who are part of the broader team. It's not just me, Lindsay, and Annis, but we actually have a whole bunch of staff that meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards, which are set by the National Park Service and are kind of considered to be the gold standard for preservation, and is often required when you're bidding on federal or state funded preservation projects. We were actually told by the state, by the Mass Historical Commission, that we have the most qualified staff out of any regional planning agency in Massachusetts. So we display that proudly. In addition to those folks, we've also been collaborating with our Equitable Preservation Working Group, which I jokingly call our brain trust. This is kind of like our internal advisory group of folks who maybe don't have that direct experience or expertise in preservation, but have a lot of expertise in working with equity issues. And so we have been collaborating with them throughout the past 2 years as we've been developing this practice area to make sure that we're really embedding equity in the approach that we're taking and the work that we're doing. Before we talk a little bit about what that work is, just wanted to share some context for what historic preservation looks like in the region. There are 19 local governments out of our 101 cities and towns that are considered to be certified local governments. Some of you may come from CLG communities. The CLG program is a National Park Service program that's meant to kind of like recognize and reward, and to some extent incentivize a high level of professionalization amongst local preservation programs. So those 19 cities and towns in our region actually represent 36% of all of the CLGs in Massachusetts. So a fairly high concentration there. A little less than half of communities in our region have a local historic district, so they do some kind of regulation. But over half have a demolition delay bylaw ordinance. It's slightly more popular than doing local historic districts. Interestingly, only 19 communities in our region have a historic preservation plan, and only 4 of those were done in the past decade. So as planners, to us, that really kind of indicates that there is a need for more proactive preservation planning. So just a quick snapshot of what we've been up to over the past couple of years. As Anna said, there really has been a foundation of doing this work at MAPC that's really embedded in kind of all the work that the agency does, but has often been led by the Arts and Culture Department. So we really tried to kind of dig into that foundation and understand what the agency's already done, and then build on those partnerships and build on the types of projects that the agency has already engaged in. And then thanks to the advocacy of Annis and others, staff such as Lindsay and myself have been hired who can help lead this work. One of the
We seem to have lost Sarah.
Oh, Sarah, we lost you.
things that we did over the past 2 years was doing what we called a needs assessment. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in the office and sometimes my my Wi-Fi goes out.
That would be okay if you were in your home, Sarah, but it's it's a pretty bad indictment of the office. So I'll have to look into that.
It seems to only go out when I'm presenting or on Zoom calls. So basically just trying to really understand what is the need, what is the role that MAPC can play. We talked to individual cities and towns, we talked to CBOs, we talked to other regional planning agencies in Massachusetts to understand what they were doing. We did a survey, focus groups, kind of the whole 9 yards. And what we found is that historic preservation is often stated as a local priority, but there's just not a lot of capacity. There's not a lot of expertise. And so communities need help with really a range of preservation planning activities. There are also a lot of communities that have kind of taken a closer look at preservation due to the 250th anniversary commemoration events that are happening now. And that's, I think, brought up some of the conversation as well. I will also note, we didn't include it in the slide, but in the survey that we did, we got so much feedback from folks that said things like they were delighted to work with MAPC on preservation and that they really valued their relationship with MAPC. So that was heartening to hear. And then I'd say more recently, in the past kind of 6 to 12 months, we've really been trying to take the work of that foundation and that needs assessment to chart a path forward. So some of that has been building capacity within the agency. We did an all staff lunch and learn to kind of do a preservation 101 presentation. We've been having conversations with staff about ways to integrate preservation into projects throughout the agency's practice area, because Lindsay and I want to make sure that it's not just the 2 of us that are holding this work, that it's really shared broadly. And then slightly more externally facing, trying to provide technical assistance communities through one-off requests, but also discrete projects. And then trying to strengthen connections with other preservation practitioners, including those who work for the Mass Historical Commission and for local groups and advocacy organizations. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk a little bit more about what that approach looks like.
You can go to the next one, because we're
Okay.
doing art. Yeah, so we sort of take sort of three prongs in how we approach all our work, and that is one, that we are telling the full story, right? Like that we are including more inclusive histories, whether this is through like master plans. Now generally we'll have, if a town has a 1754 slave census, we include mention of this in an image in the master plans. We are also trying to prioritize, other marginalized voices in our, different preservation ventures and history and heritage. We also are trying to center people, because we recognize, especially in the historic preservation aspect of the history and heritage area of practice, that, oftentimes people just think we're just trying to keep a building and everything, but the reason we want to preserve a building is related to its relationship to the people, to the community. That's what gives it importance. So again, and then that goes into the embracing change, right? Like history and heritage should not be stopping, change and growth and progress in our communities, but used to help inform where you want to go. That whole, you have to know where you've been to know how you want to move forward. And then some of the services in which we are doing this stuff is the, so some are like historic preservation plans. So one is the Stoneham Preservation Plan that we are currently doing. Yes, Erin. It actually marks the first time the agency has engaged in this type of work, and the first time that we have actually won a bid for a project being funded by the Mass Historical Commission, or MHC. Another area that we've been sort of working and expanding into is sustainable heritage. And so we are working with the town of Marblehead on a sustainable heritage project, which is in collaboration with our clean energy department. And this one is also interesting because Marblehead had originally reached out to MHC, and through the partnerships that we had formed there, they sent Marblehead to us, and it's one of our TAP technical assistance projects that we have funded. Another area that is really interesting that we have been working in is in commemorations. And so we have provided technical assistance to both Salem and Lexington, and we are also supporting municipalities in approaching commemorations through the Making It Public program. And I just want to note that there really is an opportunity at the state level regarding commemorations and how people are thinking and approaching it. And we as an agency are able to meet this moment, which is really, it's exciting. For next slide. So for heritage tourism, we have, worked on projects such as the Battle Road African American Heritage Map project with the towns of Arlington, Concord, and Lexington to do sort of market studies and develop recommendations to increase economic impact through, heritage tourism resources. We are also going to kind of lump the next two together. We have been broadening our approach to staple projects at MAPC, including master plans, hazard mitigation plans, and open space and recreation plans to more fully include historic resources and considerations. They've always been a part of these, but we're really fleshing it out. Another example of this is the open space and residence design for OSRD for Duxbury is considering below ground archaeological resources for the first time in its development, which is really exciting. Next slide. So yeah, Indigenous history and partnerships, we've been working to strengthen our partnership with tribes, tribal citizens, and Indigenous-led organizations. This is more than just through the history and heritage area of practice that we are building out. This is across the entire agency. So we have made a lot of progress. We are continuing to do so through projects like the statewide resiliency playbook that is being led by our clean energy department. So if you have any questions or you want to learn more about this, we are happy to discuss that with you. Another interesting thing is in the MACRIS database. And Sarah, if you can jump in with what MACRIS, the acronym, I can never quite remember.
Sure. Yeah, so MACRIS is the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. It's basically the database that Mass Historical Commission uses to keep track of all the known historic resources in the state, whether or not they've been listed in the National Register.
We do. And we're collaborating with our data services team, MHC, and even Mass GIS to expand how this historic resources data is integrated into not only our planning projects, but trying to have a better understanding so we can support municipalities and including that, especially, you know, there were a few slides back an image of in Ipswich, they included that as they talked about 3A. And then next slide. So those were the sort of projects, but we also support municipalities in other ways. And one is with the Eastern Massachusetts Historical Commission Coalition, which is a mouthful. We just call it the EMHCC, and we co-run this with MHC and Preservation Massachusetts. And we hold meetings about 3 times a year, and we focus on topics important to our audience that we've sort of gathered input from them. And our audience is primarily historical commission members. And last but not least, we manage the historic district appeals process for many communities in our region. You can see them listed there by sub-region. And we typically handle about 1 appeal a year. And actually we have an ongoing one in Newton right now. I have a hearing scheduled tomorrow. And I would just like to take a moment to share our appreciation for all the volunteers who serve on our hearing panel. Because that is a big lift for them, but very much appreciated by us that they do that. So, and so thank you on behalf of the 3 of us. Oh. Yes.
And Annis, do you want to moderate questions?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Keith.
Great presentation and thank you for your work. I was intrigued to see that the MAPC is involved in the appeals process, and I'm just wondering how that works. I have to just confess my my extensive knowledge of an appeals process goes mostly back to Nantucket, where I worked for a while and still pay close attention to. Their appeals are under a separate statute, and the appeals are to the select board, which is usually woefully prepared to deal with any appeal. So I'm wondering just how that works.
Let me take that one if I could, Lindsay. Lindsay has fairly recently been given this responsibility at MAPC. It is true, Keith. I was surprised when I learned this a while ago, obviously, but in Massachusetts, if you want to appeal the decision, or at least in most regions, things are often different on the Cape and the islands, but if you want to appeal a local historic board decision, you appeal it to the regional planning agency. And we don't have too many of them. For some reason that always escapes my understanding, the majority of them seem to be in Newton. I don't know why. And it's always been that way for 20 years. So I don't know if I don't want to speculate. We do this sort of as a quasi-judicial function. We have a board that we routinely put together to hear the appeal. They make a recommendation to me. Lindsay provides staff support. Other people have provided staff support prior to that. When I arrived here, it was Joan Blaustein, who a few of you will remember. And then, you know, I sign the decision that the board comes to, which is usually to uphold the decision of the local board, but not always. And that's the process. Lindsay, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, that covers it. The only other thing I might add is if you do not designate us as the appeals, it generally is Superior Court, which is why I think most people have MAPC listed.
Good. Okay, Mo, next question.
Yeah, it's a more of a comment. We've been very active in Needham in trying to save and preserve historic buildings. That is, some of us. The demolition delay is woefully inadequate. I don't care how long the delay is. We have a 6-month delay. It saves almost no historic structures. And there is no pathway other than to establish an individual historic district, which my wife and I just did for our house through town meeting. It's the only historic district in this entire town and consists of one property. And we did that because there is no way to assure the preservation of a building, even when you own it, because as soon as it's sold in this housing market, it's gone. I don't care how historic, how beautiful, it's gone. So there needs to be developed, I think, a pathway for an individual owner who wants to preserve the property for which they are stewards while they live in it, to preserve that for future changes of ownership. And to the extent that we can be working on that, that would be great. And really, thank you for the work you're doing in this field. It's very important. Our town loses 2 or 3 historic buildings a year. And if you add up the number of buildings in the town that are historic, it's not going to take that long to get rid of most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. I think that one of the things that we've been working on in the preservation plan for Stoneham is really thinking about what can the town do for its own properties versus what can the town do to regulate private properties versus what are the incentives that are available for private property owners to make independent decisions. And I think preservation restrictions are an option for homeowners that want to preserve their house kind of outside of a land use regulatory environment. And I believe, Lindsay, had you covered this in an EMHCC webinar? Maybe you could put that link in the chat.
Yes, we will. We did, and I will put that in. And I would say if you want to see really effective demolition delay bylaws, and because it's not just the bylaw, it's the process a town has after a bylaw sort of is enacted, is Medford has a really good, really robust, and same with Salem. I would
And
look
no
to
longer
those.
the delays.
I think they're each 9 months to a year. I will say with them, it is not the length of the delay because people will just wait it out. It is the sort of systems that the historic commission and other people in town have in place in order to work with developers, either find a new property owner to, work with the developers to, weigh in on the plans and stuff like that. They've gotten sort of that negotiation between the two down, and also even if a project does go forward with demolition, to document it and everything so that we don't fully lose it. And so let me.
So can you post a link to that and I'll share it with our historical commission?
Yes.
Because they would be very interested. They feel their hands are tied.
And I will also say, last little thing on this, and we can talk offline about this, is that both Medford and Salem are really responsive about if you reach out to them with questions regarding this.
Very
They're
helpful.
really good.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Was that Buzz?
I know,
Sorry, I didn't hear. I didn't hear you.
I
I'd double
Sorry
down
about
on.
that.
I think
You just
I
got
was
something
thinking
in the
that-
chat about historic preservation restrictions, which Mo is at chapter 184, section 31, is where it is. And now that it's been brought up, that is can be a very effective tool for protecting historic resources. And it's completely analogous. It's the exact same statute as conservation restrictions. And I wonder if MAPC might look, since we have such an incredible staff that's doing this work, we might look into the same kind of subsidy programs or grant programs that EOEEA give to buying conservation restrictions all over the state for various reasons. And I don't think Mass Historic Commission has that kind of a funding program. And historic preservation restrictions, you could do it under the CPA, so you shouldn't forget that the CPA can do historic preservation, and that means a restriction. But in many towns, it's really hard to use a restrictive a regulatory program to make people do the right things. But if you can work a subsidy program, and the historic preservation restrictions are exactly for that. So I would hope MAPC might look to see how your planning stuff that the cultural group is doing can be linked up with some funding to really use historic preservation restrictions. They're very helpful, and I'm happy to help with them because I do them all the time.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is there any way to copy the links in the chat? I can't seem to get my computer to do it.
I just open them and then keep them on my browser afterward.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
And thanks, Buzz. Really appreciate that comment.
Great. Thank you. Imai, now that I'm off mute and I can properly call on people.
Okay. I was curious about Macris and how they go about getting those properties that are on their inventory. Do towns and municipalities submit them? Do they go out and, just, walk around historic areas and try and inventory? Is it a combination of both?
Annis, I don't know if you want to try to take this or if you want me to.
Watch what boiled eggs do to your body.
Have you ever noticed how you could easily eat 3?
Oh, do we have?
Hey, let's talk about boiled eggs instead.
Yeah, right. I can start and maybe you can add if I'm missing anything, because this is one of the things that we've been looking into as a potential area that MAPC might provide some support in, of like actually doing some of these survey forms. So typically MHC offers survey and planning grants, and these are preservation plans fall under them, but also the actual surveying of these properties is one of the things that they fund. And typically they will have certain criteria that have to be met for the city or town to get matched with a preservation consultant who can fill out these forms, and they'll decide like what are the important areas of town that haven't been inventoried, and create these inventories and like somewhat of a step-by-step basis. Very rarely do they have enough capacity to do like all of the properties in town in one go. So if you look at the projects that are coming through the survey and planning grant program, a lot of them are survey programs. And, we're really interested in just making sure that that work is being done in ways that actually like reflect the things that cities and towns value and help to tell the full story of cities and towns. A lot of these consultants are actually from outside of Massachusetts and apply a kind of a different lens to the work that's happening here. I don't know if you had anything to add, Sarah.
I think that's great. The only thing I would add is that the data that's reflected in Macris has essentially kind of been approved by the MHC. So it's not like just anyone can go and ask to put a point in the database. There is this much more formal process.
And the one last thing is, especially if you're doing planning around and using this, there are different designations, whether it's just an inventoried property or is it a national register. And oftentimes, like we try and rank them, but at the same time, that is also very community based, because I know my town, we have a lot of national register listed properties that are actually not the most important places in our community. They just haven't, they were done early on when it was much easier to get a national register listing. And so some of the more important stuff that like the MAPC staff working on 3A have been working on, in my town and everything. Using the blue dots is what they're called, right? Like they're just the inventory ones. And so working with that to overlay that on flooding data and stuff like that.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, Mo and Imai, your hands are still raised. Do you have?
Could I do one follow-up to what was just said? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Imai.
So I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, and it's largely reliant on survey data from towns and filling it out with grants, do we find like gaps, where historical resources in towns where maybe historic preservation is not their focus, that those don't get on there, they don't get attention?
Huge gaps. I would say in a lot of the communities where we've been working on projects, these inventory forms largely have not been updated since like the 1970s or so, when there was an effort nationwide to inventory historic resources. So not only are you missing anything that kind of became historic in intervening years, but you're also missing the perspectives of what is considered to be important and considered to be historic. So that's part of the reason, like Anna said, that we're very interested in getting into that survey and inventory work, because we think it's important for these resources to be identified so that they can be considered in future planning and implementation projects.
And the other thing is also interested in supporting municipalities to go for these survey and planning grants for like survey master plans. So not necessarily a preservation plan, but it sort of helps a town figure out what chunks they should be doing maybe every year or every couple of years. And once you have that plan to MHC, typically has seemed like Manchester by the Sea has gotten a survey and planning grant every year to do different ones of those chunks and everything. So once they know you have a solid plan and they will help you get a solid plan, that seems to also be really working for towns to be redoing or increasing the inventory.
Thank you.
Great. And Mark, to wrap us up.
Yes, it is. If you're okay with this, Erin, to wrap us up, I wanted to give a big thank you to Annis and Lindsay and Sarah. This is the third time in my tenure at MAPC that we have undertaken a practice in historic preservation. And what I feel is different this time is, first of all, Sarah and Lindsay have a big team involved, both the practitioners and the advisory committee, some of whom I suspect are going to become certified practitioners at some point in time, with the goal of making sure that this can be a long-lasting capability at the agency that we will routinely be able to provide to our cities and towns. The second thing that's really different is that word, it's sort of embodied in the word heritage, although that's an oversimplification. We are not just trying to tell stories of buildings. We're not just trying to sort of retell realities or myths about the region that we learned in grade school if we grew up here. We are trying to really focus on the people in those buildings and in those stories. And we're trying to make sure that there is a more complete understanding of the area's history. And that it is one that includes all peoples. And I'm very proud of that. I think they're doing a great job. And I really wanted the executive committee to be able to share in some.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I'm sure we all echo those remarks. So thank you. Thank you, Arts and Culture Department.
Thank you so much.
So much
And
for all
Land
your
Use
work.
Department.
Great. Next up on the agenda, other business not known at the time of this posting.
I do not have anything.
Okay,
Madam
great.
President.
Yep. So with that, I am going to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda and to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
All right, I have that motion made by Mo and the second made by Colette. I want to just quickly say thank you for dealing with my congestion today and my lack of lighting. I really appreciate your patience with that. So if everyone could come off mute, we're gonna get this vote underway. So here we go. Imai.
Aye.
Colette.
Aye.
Kurt.
Aye.
Keith.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Tom Daniel. John DePriest, I think he had to run off. John F.
Aye.
Tom.
Aye.
Mo.
Aye.
Sagoon. Tabor.
Aye.
Robert. Angie. Gina. Steve Olenoff.
Aye.
Vandana. Claire. Sam. Steve.
Aye.
Juan. Elaine.
Aye.
Erin. Aye. And with that, our MAPC August 21st Executive Committee meeting has adjourned at 12:57.